January 17, 1945. The sky over the Rhineland is a steel-gray canvas, streaked with frozen breath from jet streams. Below, the remnants of a shattered city smolder, chimneys wisping ash into the cold morning air. High above, a lone flight of P-51 Mustangs tears through the clouds, their polished fuselages catching fractured sunlight. The roar of Merlin engines pierces the quiet like a steel heartbeat, precise and relentless. German pilots, seasoned and confident, glance at the approaching silhouettes. Their FW-190s and Bf-109s, the pride of the Luftwaffe, have dominated these skies for years. A brief chuckle escapes one cockpit. How could these Americans, with their sleek, unfamiliar machines, pose any threat? Then it begins. Tracer rounds slice through the thin winter air, a deadly lattice of fire. The Mustangs dive, climb, and pivot in flawless synchronicity. 16.50 caliber Browning guns open up, a storm of lead raining down with mechanical precision. Within moments, arrogance meets reality. Planes spiral, alarms shriek, and the Luftwaffe learns that underestimation in the sky is fatal. The air is no longer a theater. It is a battlefield where speed, firepower, and courage decide life and death. By late 1943, the skies over Europe had become a war zone unlike any in history. The Allied strategic bombing campaign had shifted into high gear, aimed at crippling German industry and infrastructure. Factories in the Ruhr Valley, ball-bearing plants in Schweinfurt, and aircraft production facilities in Munich were primary targets. Daylight raids, once considered suicidal, became a strategic necessity. Bomber formations, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, ranged deep into German territory, bristling with defensive guns. Yet losses were staggering. For every successful raid, dozens of planes returned in pieces, riddled by flak or torn apart by skilled Luftwaffe pilots. The Luftwaffe had dominated European airspace since 1940. Their pilots were disciplined, experienced, and often fanatically loyal. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, nimble and deadly, had decimated early Allied air attacks. German tactics emphasized surprise, climbing attacks from above, and coordinated squadron maneuvers. By 1943, however, the Allies had begun to close the technological and strategic gap. Long-range fighter escorts were needed to protect bombers deep over enemy territory, but existing aircraft like the P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt had limitations, either range, agility, or high-altitude performance. Enter the North American P-51 Mustang, a fighter that would alter the course of the air war. Initially designed for the British, the Mustang's early models had impressed with speed and handling but lacked the high-altitude power necessary for sustained operations over Germany. That changed when Rolls-Royce Merlin engines were fitted, unlocking performance at 25,000 feet and above. With over 1,600 miles of range, the P-51 could escort bombers from England to targets deep in the Reich and back, a feat previously impossible. The first Mustang squadrons flew cautiously into hostile airspace. Their pilots quickly realized that raw firepower alone was insufficient. Dogfighting in Europe demanded tactical finesse. Boom and zoom tactics, using high-speed dives to strike and climb back to altitude, became standard. Formation flying was critical, not just for mutual protection but to maximize the devastating effect of their 16.50 caliber Browning machine guns. Each Mustang carried enough ammunition to unleash hundreds of rounds per target, overwhelming the defenses of even the most skilled Luftwaffe pilot. Early encounters revealed the psychological component of air combat. German pilots, accustomed to outmatching most Allied fighters, often misjudged the Mustang. Reports from 1943 and early 1944 describe Luftwaffe pilots laughing at the new American fighters, calling them soft and underarmed. They underestimated the P-51's speed, maneuverability, and relentless firepower. This miscalculation would prove deadly. The Allies, meanwhile, were learning fast. Bomber formations were increasingly coordinated with Mustang escorts, which would patrol the skies for German interceptors. By mid-1944, bomber losses had begun to decrease sharply, a direct result of the Mustang's protective reach. The German air defense strategy, built on numbers and tactical surprise, began to falter. Experienced pilots were being lost in battles they had once considered routine. Luftwaffe training pipelines, already strained by the war's attrition, could not keep pace with losses. Beyond technology, morale played a pivotal role. American pilots felt a newfound confidence flying Mustangs. Speed, firepower, and extended range allowed daring attacks once deemed impossible. Conversely, German pilots faced a changing reality. Encounters with Mustangs were no longer occasional skirmishes. They became relentless assaults that shattered formations, scattered squadrons, and left even aces vulnerable. The stage was set for a shift in air superiority. The P-51 Mustang, once underestimated and dismissed, was about to prove itself in the most decisive way. By cutting through the skies over Germany with deadly precision, leaving German pilots scrambling to adapt to a new kind of aerial warfare. By mid-1944, the air war over Europe had reached a tipping point. Allied bombers struck deeper into German territory, targeting transportation hubs, fuel depots, and armament factories. Each mission exposed vulnerabilities, but the introduction of long-range P-51 Mustangs changed the equation. For the first time, heavy bombers could be escorted from English airfields all the way to Berlin and back. The psychological effect on both sides was immediate. American pilots grew bold, confident in the knowledge that enemy fighters could now be intercepted long before reaching the bombers. German pilots, meanwhile, were facing an unprecedented threat, a fighter capable of matching, and in many ways exceeding, their own aircraft in speed, firepower, and altitude. Initial encounters were shocking. Luftwaffe squadrons reported that the Mustang's Merlin engine gave it exceptional high-altitude performance, while its range allowed Americans to control the skies over key industrial zones. Tracers from 16.50 caliber machine guns tore through formations of FW-190s and Bf-109s with alarming efficiency. German aces who had dominated the skies in earlier years found themselves under fire from angles they had never anticipated. Even veteran pilots admitted to the chilling effect of these encounters, noting that the Mustang's combination of speed, firepower, and maneuverability left little room for error. Statistical evidence reinforced the growing fear. Bomber losses dropped significantly when escorted by Mustangs. In late 1944, the 8th Air Force reported a 50 to 60% reduction in losses compared to missions without Mustang support. Luftwaffe records, though incomplete due to the chaos of retreating fronts, confirm increasing casualties among veteran pilots. Training programs could not keep pace with the attrition. By the winter of 1944, German air defense units were relying increasingly on inexperienced pilots, often paired with fatigued veterans who had survived years of combat. The Mustang's presence amplified the consequences of these shortages, creating opportunities for Allied pilots to dominate aerial engagements. The German response was both tactical and psychological. Luftwaffe commanders attempted to concentrate forces for coordinated attacks, relying on intelligence reports and radar tracking. Squadrons would intercept bomber streams in an effort to break formations before Mustangs could intervene. Yet these strategies were increasingly ineffective. Mustang pilots adapted quickly, refining escort patterns, maintaining altitude advantage, and using hit-and-run techniques that leveraged both their aircraft's speed and armament. The result was a series of confrontations in which the Luftwaffe, for the first time in years, was on the defensive. Beyond the numbers, the impact on morale was profound. German pilots had once prided themselves on superiority in the skies. Now, the sudden appearance of the Mustang forced a reevaluation of skill, tactics, and survivability. Pilots who survived encounters with the P-51 often returned to base shaken, recounting stories of concentrated .50 caliber fire that could cripple an aircraft in seconds. Conversely, American pilots grew increasingly audacious. They reported that their aircraft could dive into engagements with near impunity, striking formations of enemy fighters and bombers alike before climbing back to safety. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe's underestimation of the P-51 had transformed into grudging respect and strategic recalculation. The Mustang was no longer merely a fighter, it was a tool of air supremacy, a force multiplier that reshaped the aerial battlefield. German pilots laughed at it initially, confident that their experience would carry the day. By the end of the year, They understood that underestimating the Mustang was fatal. The stage was now fully set for multiple angles of impact: human, tactical, technological, and moral, which would define the final chapters of aerial combat over Europe. The story of the P-51 Mustang is as much about human courage as it is about metal and firepower. For American pilots, flying over Europe in 1944 was a test of nerves, endurance, and skill. Each mission demanded precise coordination, split-second decisions, and the ability to remain calm under the constant roar of engines and the whine of incoming flak. The first wave of Mustang pilots quickly discovered a unique blend of exhilaration and dread. They were flying machines capable of unmatched speed and firepower, yet each dogfight was a gamble. One misjudged turn, one moment of hesitation, and the sky could become their tomb. Veteran pilots recounted the psychological weight of long-range missions. Hours spent climbing to 25,000 feet in freezing temperatures, followed by sudden dives into combat, tested both body and mind. Yet the P-51 offered a kind of reassurance. Pilots trusted its responsiveness, its ability to climb rapidly and maneuver against Luftwaffe fighters. The 16.50 caliber Browning machine guns were a lethal extension of the pilot's will, capable of cutting through enemy aircraft before the opposition could react. For the first time in the war, Allied airmen felt the edge of technological superiority in their hands, a confidence that often proved decisive in the chaos of aerial combat. On the German side, the human toll was immediate and severe. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots who had once dominated the skies began to experience the fear of being outclassed. Encounters with Mustangs were fast, unpredictable, and deadly. Even aces, men with dozens of confirmed kills, found themselves outmaneuvered, their aircraft shredded by a barrage of well-aimed fire. The realization that the P-51 could turn a seasoned pilot's skill into vulnerability created a psychological strain that would haunt German air units for months. Every mission carried a grim awareness. The Mustang's arrival meant that error was often fatal, and survival required more than experience. It demanded constant adaptation. Tactically, the P-51 Mustang transformed the way air combat was conducted over Europe. Allied commanders quickly recognized that bomber missions needed a permanent fighter shield, not just intermittent cover. The Mustang's range allowed it to escort formations from the English coast to targets deep in Germany, changing the dynamics of strategic bombing. Escort tactics evolved accordingly. Mustangs flew in tight formations, maintaining altitude advantage while scanning for threats. Pilots executed bounce attacks, diving from above with extreme speed, striking enemy fighters, and then climbing back to a safe height before the Luftwaffe could react. The bomber formations themselves became more confident. Heavy bombers, once reliant on defensive gunfire alone, now had a protective umbrella of Mustangs patrolling their flanks and rear. This coordination reduced losses and allowed bombers to press deeper into enemy territory, hitting critical industrial and military targets with unprecedented efficiency. The tactic was not just about protection, it was about dominance. Mustangs could engage Luftwaffe interceptors preemptively, breaking enemy formations before they reached the bombers. The result was a tactical revolution. Control of the airspace was shifting decisively to the Allies. The Luftwaffe, however, adapted in response. German pilots attempted to exploit gaps, launching concentrated attacks on isolated bombers or escorting fighters. High-speed diving attacks and coordinated formation tactics were employed in attempts to overwhelm Mustang defenses. Yet the combination of superior speed, firepower, and pilot coordination rendered these efforts increasingly ineffective. Even when German pilots achieved surprise, the Mustang's dive and climb strategy often allowed them to counterattack with devastating effect. Tactics extended beyond individual dogfights to entire operations. Mission planning incorporated intelligence on Luftwaffe airfields, known patrol routes, and radar coverage. Mustang squadrons were often deployed to intercept threats before they could converge on bombers, essentially turning the escort role into offensive dominance. The ability to dictate where and when engagements occurred gave the Allies not just a defensive advantage but a strategic one, shaping the course of aerial campaigns over Germany in late 1944 and early 1945. The P-51 Mustang was not merely an aircraft. It was a convergence of innovation, engineering, and practical combat design. At its core was the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, licensed from Britain, which provided unmatched high-altitude performance. The Mustang could climb to 25,000 feet with ease, reach speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour, and maintain agility that rivaled the Luftwaffe's finest fighters. These capabilities alone made it a formidable opponent, but the true edge lay in its firepower. 16.50 caliber Browning machine guns, mounted in the wings, could unleash a concentrated storm of bullets, capable of crippling a single-engine fighter in mere seconds. Range was another game-changer. Prior fighters such as the P-47 Thunderbolt had impressive performance, but lacked the fuel endurance to escort bombers deep into German territory. The Mustang could accompany bombers all the way to Berlin, ensuring that Luftwaffe attacks had to contend not only with defensive gunners but also with a ready, lethal escort. Additionally, the aircraft's lightweight frame and laminar flow wing design enhanced maneuverability and reduced drag, allowing pilots to execute aggressive boom and zoom tactics without sacrificing control. The combination of speed, range, and firepower created a multiplier effect. One Mustang squadron could dominate airspace, disrupt enemy formations, and inflict significant losses before Luftwaffe pilots could coordinate an effective response. German reports frequently described the psychological impact of facing such an aircraft. Its presence alone forced operational changes and heightened alertness, often contributing to mistakes under pressure. The Mustang, in essence, embodied the intersection of human skill and technological superiority, redefining what a fighter could achieve in the European theater. Leadership played a critical role in translating technological and tactical advantages into tangible results. On the Allied side, commanders such as General Jimmy Doolittle and Colonel Curtis LeMay emphasized combined arms coordination and air superiority. Their directives ensured that Mustang squadrons were integrated into strategic bombing missions, not merely deployed as reactive escorts. Training focused on discipline, formation flying, situational awareness, and rapid communication between flight leaders and wingmen. The result was an organized, cohesive fighting force capable of exploiting every advantage the Mustang offered. Leadership also influenced morale and decision-making in the Luftwaffe. By 1944, experienced German commanders faced an unenviable choice: continue offensive sorties with diminishing pilot quality or adopt a defensive posture to protect critical infrastructure. This tension often led to fragmented responses. While some Luftwaffe units adapted with new tactics, many were unable to maintain cohesion under the relentless pressure imposed by Mustang escorts. Commanders witnessed the erosion of both strategic options and pilot confidence, which further accelerated the decline in Luftwaffe effectiveness. Moreover, leadership at the squadron and flight level directly impacted survival. American pilots were trained to trust both their aircraft and their wingmen. Decisions made in seconds, whether to engage, evade, or pursue, were often the difference between life and death. German pilots, even experienced aces, increasingly faced the dilemma of whether to fight or flee when confronted by Mustangs in formation. The P-51 forced a recalibration of leadership at every echelon, revealing that tactical and strategic superiority relied as much on human decision-making as on mechanical innovation. The psychological impact of the Mustang on the Luftwaffe cannot be overstated. Early in 1944, German pilots laughed at the new American fighter, convinced that their training and superior aircraft would ensure victory. This initial underestimation was fatal. Encounters with Mustangs soon revealed that speed, firepower, and tactical ingenuity could nullify even experienced pilots' advantages. German records and memoirs describe moments of disbelief. Formations disrupted, aircraft shredded in seconds, and the unsettling realization that survival was no longer guaranteed, even for the elite. Morale deteriorated rapidly. Veteran pilots saw comrades fall to a machine they had previously considered inferior. The psychological strain affected decision-making, leading to fragmented attacks and increased vulnerability. Mustang's presence also eroded confidence in leadership, as coordinated Luftwaffe responses often failed to achieve results. By late 1944, German pilots referred to the Mustang with grudging respect, acknowledging its lethal efficiency while lamenting the impossibility of countering it effectively under existing operational conditions. On the Allied side, moral effects were equally pronounced, though in the opposite direction. Pilots reported a sense of empowerment and reliability when flying Mustangs. Knowing that they could escort bombers with relative security fostered confidence and aggression. Personal accounts frequently highlight the thrill of maneuvering at high speed, outpacing enemy aircraft, and unleashing devastating firepower. The Mustang became more than a machine. It became a symbol of skill, courage, and technological dominance. Late 1944, the skies over the Reich had become a theater of relentless conflict. Allied bombers surged across the continent in massive formations, their silver fuselages gleaming under the winter sun. For the Luftwaffe, each approaching bomber stream was a gauntlet, a chance to inflict damage, defend the homeland, and restore fading dominance in the air. Yet the first wave of Mustangs had transformed this battlefield. German pilots, once supremely confident, now faced an enemy that combined speed, firepower, and range in ways they had never encountered. November 26, 1944, marked a pivotal day. A formation of B-17s en route to a critical target in the Ruhr was escorted by over 50 P-51 Mustangs. As German interceptors rose from airfields near Cologne, they expected the usual scattered bomber defenses. What they encountered instead were Mustangs circling above, poised and ready. At 10:45 a.m., the first contact was made. Mustang pilots, maintaining altitude advantage, dove in coordinated attacks. Tracer fire laced the sky, bullets tearing through FW-190s before they could react. The efficiency was staggering. Within minutes, multiple German aircraft were hit. Some spiraled in controlled crashes, engines ablaze. Others stalled and plummeted into fields below. Luftwaffe units reported that for every fighter they successfully engaged, 2 or 3 were destroyed or forced to retreat. Experienced pilots, including seasoned aces with decades of combat experience, found themselves outmaneuvered by tactics they had perfected against earlier Allied fighters. The P-51 had rewritten the rules of engagement. Tactical coordination played a decisive role. Mustang squadrons used pack formations, overlapping cover zones to ensure that no enemy fighter could strike without facing concentrated counterfire. Wingmen maintained visual contact, ready to intervene the moment an attacker committed. This coordination maximized the effectiveness of their 16.50 caliber guns. Each Mustang could engage multiple targets in quick succession, reducing the chance of escape. German pilots, caught between bomber gunners and Mustang fire, faced an almost impossible scenario. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was immediate and profound. Radio chatter from German units reveals panic, frustration, and disbelief. Veteran pilots, accustomed to exploiting enemy weaknesses, were now the hunted. Several squadron reports described the chaos. Formations broken, leaders forced to retreat, aircraft lost before effective defense could be mounted. Morale, long a hallmark of Luftwaffe efficiency, began to fray under the relentless pressure of these high-speed engagements. By mid-December, this pattern had repeated across multiple missions targeting industrial centers in Essen, Dortmund, and the Ruhr. Mustang pilots, now highly experienced, executed attacks with near-precision timing. Dive, fire, climb, regroup, over and over, German units found themselves outnumbered in effectiveness if not in aircraft. The P-51 was no longer simply an escort. It had become the primary instrument of air dominance, dictating the tempo and outcome of aerial engagements. Amid these battles, human stories surfaced that illustrated the intensity of the turning point. Lieutenant Johnny H. Smith of the 357th Fighter Group described a single encounter over Cologne where his 4-plane flight intercepted a formation of 7 FW-190s. Within moments, 3 enemy aircraft were smoking and descending. Smith later noted, "I had never felt the sky so alive, so lethal. Every second counted. One wrong move and it would be me." Similar accounts came from German pilots, who recounted watching Mustangs dive from seemingly impossible angles, their concentrated fire leaving no margin for error. The sheer lethality of the 16.50 caliber guns cannot be overstated. Where previous Allied fighters had relied on cannons or smaller machine guns, the Mustang's armament allowed sustained, devastating bursts. In a typical engagement, a Mustang could fire hundreds of rounds in seconds, creating a lethal envelope around enemy aircraft. Survivors later described bullet-riddled fuselages, wings torn, and engines disabled before they could react. The German perception of air superiority was collapsing under this storm of lead and coordinated aggression. By the end of 1944, the message was clear. The Mustang was a game-changer. The Luftwaffe's dominance in Europe, built over 5 years of conflict, was eroding. Pilot losses were mounting, experienced aces were disappearing, and strategic options were narrowing. In the bitter winter sky over Germany, the P-51 had emerged as the decisive weapon, rewriting the rules of air combat and forcing German pilots to confront a lethal reality they had once dismissed. The stage was now set for the final phase of aerial supremacy, where the Mustang's impact would peak, German morale would crumble further, and the decisive blow to Luftwaffe operations would be delivered. The winter of 1944-45 saw the P-51 Mustang fully assert its dominance. German pilots, once confident in their skill and aircraft, were now forced to adapt or perish. In January 1945, during a massive Allied bombing raid on the industrial heart of the Ruhr, more than 70 Mustangs escorted a formation of B-17s and B-24s. The Luftwaffe scrambled multiple squadrons, determined to intercept and destroy the bomber stream. Yet the encounter unfolded differently than any German pilot had expected. From the moment they entered the engagement zone, Mustang pilots held the tactical advantage. Maintaining higher altitude and superior speed, they executed coordinated dives, striking FW-190s and Bf-109s with devastating accuracy. Within minutes, German formations were fractured, their aircraft spiraling in flames or retreating in disarray. Eyewitness accounts from both sides described the scene as a storm of fire and smoke, tracer lines cutting the sky in intricate, deadly patterns. Experienced Luftwaffe aces, such as Oberleutnant Franz Schall and Hauptmann Heinrich Bahr, were forced to disengage under concentrated Mustang fire. Pilots who had once dominated the skies were now outmatched in both speed and firepower. The 16.50 caliber machine guns of the P-51 proved decisive. Each aircraft could unleash a torrent of bullets, capable of destroying a German fighter before it completed an evasive maneuver. Unlike earlier Allied fighters, Mustangs did not need to rely on sheer numbers alone. Skillful formation flying and precise bursts allowed even small squadrons to inflict disproportionate damage. By the end of the mission, reports indicated that more than 20 Luftwaffe aircraft were lost, with minimal Mustang casualties. The statistics reflected not just superior technology, but the culmination of tactical adaptation, pilot training, and psychological advantage. Beyond individual dogfights, the Mustang redefined operational planning. Luftwaffe commanders recognized that unescorted bombers were no longer the primary threat. They were now targets for systematic, well-coordinated fighter interception by highly mobile Mustangs. Even concentrated German attacks could not penetrate the escort screen without sustaining catastrophic losses. This forced the Luftwaffe to alter deployment strategies, often delaying or canceling missions, and contributed to the overall erosion of German air power. The human dimension of these encounters is striking. American pilots reported a mixture of exhilaration and grim focus. Lieutenant Robert Bob Johnson described a fight over Essen. The sky was full of tracers and smoke. You had to stay alert every second, or it would be your last. But the Mustang, she responded to every move. You felt alive, but you never forgot the danger. On the German side, veterans recounted that morale was deteriorating. Pilots expressed fear and frustration at the seemingly unassailable nature of the Mustang, acknowledging that their once dominant tactics were now ineffective against this new threat. In late February 1945, during Operation Clarion, a massive series of strikes against German transportation and communication lines, Mustangs escorted thousands of bombers and attacked enemy airfields en route. Luftwaffe losses during these missions were staggering. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed or damaged, experienced pilots killed or grounded, and airfield infrastructure crippled. These missions demonstrated not only the Mustang's lethal capability in air-to-air combat, but also its strategic impact on the broader war effort. The Luftwaffe was no longer able to mount coordinated resistance effectively, and German defensive air operations were increasingly reactive, disorganized, and ineffective. By March 1945, German pilots openly acknowledged the Mustang's dominance. Accounts describe a shift from confident aggression to cautious evasion, as even elite aces avoided direct engagement whenever possible. The psychological transformation was profound. Laughter and underestimation were replaced by dread and respect. The Mustang had not only neutralized the Luftwaffe's technical superiority but had also reshaped the mental landscape of aerial warfare. This turning point marked more than just a technological or tactical victory. It symbolized a shift in the balance of power in the European air war. The P-51 Mustang had become a decisive instrument of Allied air supremacy, capable of dictating engagements, preserving bomber formations, and eroding German morale on multiple fronts. Its impact was measured not only in destroyed aircraft and reduced bomber losses, but also in the strategic freedom it afforded Allied commanders, who could now plan raids deep into German territory with unprecedented confidence. As German pilots retreated, regrouped, and recalculated, the consequences of the Mustang's ascendancy rippled across the continent. The stage was set for the aftermath. The crumbling of Luftwaffe resistance, the acceleration of Allied bombing campaigns, and the ultimate tipping of air superiority firmly into Allied hands. By spring 1945, the impact of the P-51 Mustang on the European air war was undeniable. Allied bombers, once highly vulnerable to Luftwaffe attacks, now moved through hostile skies with a new sense of security. Statistical reports from the 8th Air Force reveal a dramatic decline in bomber losses. Missions escorted by Mustangs suffered approximately half the casualties of unescorted raids. Entire campaigns, such as the attacks on the Ruhr and the transportation hubs of northern Germany, succeeded with precision and minimal losses, a testament to the effectiveness of Mustang escorts. For the Luftwaffe, the consequences were catastrophic. Veteran pilots, once the backbone of Germany's air defense, had been decimated. Training programs, stretched thin by the attrition of years of conflict, could not replace the lost expertise. Squadrons were forced to integrate inexperienced pilots into critical operations, a move that further amplified casualties. Luftwaffe records from late 1944 through early 1945 indicate that a significant proportion of aircraft losses came not from large bomber formations alone but from engagements with Mustang fighters. The psychological toll on German airmen was profound. Pilots who survived engagements reported lingering fear and anxiety, a departure from the confidence that had characterized the Luftwaffe's earlier campaigns. Allied leadership recognized the strategic significance of this transformation. Generals Doolittle, Spaatz, and their staff understood that air superiority could now be leveraged to accelerate ground operations. With German skies increasingly dominated by Mustangs, Allied planners had the freedom to target transportation lines, fuel depots, and industrial centers with impunity. The operational tempo increased, and the combined effect of strategic bombing and fighter dominance disrupted German logistics, slowed troop movements, and weakened morale across both military and civilian populations. The Mustang's influence extended beyond immediate combat. American pilots who flew these aircraft developed a new standard of aerial proficiency. Skills such as formation discipline, energy fighting, and precise marksmanship became hallmarks of Mustang squadrons. This knowledge, combined with advanced tactics like coordinated dive and climb attacks, established benchmarks for fighter operations that would influence air combat doctrine for decades. Even in post-war assessments, military analysts cited the P-51's operational flexibility and firepower as revolutionary, emphasizing how a combination of technology and training could decisively shift air superiority in a theater-wide conflict. Human stories illuminate the scale of this transformation. Squadron reports describe instances where Mustang flights intercepted German fighters near industrial targets, downing multiple aircraft while sustaining minimal casualties. One account from Captain James Jim Miller of the 4th Fighter Group details a raid near Essen. "We dove on the enemy formation, and within minutes 3 of their planes were trailing smoke. It felt surreal, almost too easy, but we knew that each second could change everything." Meanwhile, German pilots recounted the sudden and devastating efficiency of Mustang attacks, with some noting that their own aircraft were often incapacitated before defensive maneuvers could be executed. The effectiveness of Mustangs in these missions forced the Luftwaffe into defensive patterns that were reactive rather than proactive. Concentrated attacks were delayed, airfields were evacuated under pressure, and missions were often cancelled entirely due to the threat of Mustang interception. Operational flexibility, once a strength of the Luftwaffe, became a liability under the relentless pressure of American fighter dominance. German commanders were forced to recalibrate strategies, often sacrificing critical targets or routes to avoid catastrophic losses. By the conclusion of this period, the Mustang's legacy was clear. It had not only ensured the survival of Allied bomber fleets, but had also fundamentally altered the balance of power in the European air war. The stage was now set for the broader consequences, both strategic and human, that would unfold as Germany's capacity to wage air combat crumbled entirely. By early 1945, the cumulative effect of Mustang dominance was unmistakable. The Luftwaffe was hemorrhaging experienced pilots and aircraft at an unsustainable rate. Aerial engagement reports show that for every German fighter destroyed by Mustangs, one or more Allied bombers were protected from attack. The combination of reduced bomber losses and mounting Luftwaffe casualties created a strategic feedback loop. As German air resistance weakened, Allied bombing campaigns became more effective, further crippling German industry and infrastructure. The human toll was severe on both sides. Luftwaffe pilots, once the elite of German military aviation, faced a psychological crisis. Experienced aces were killed or forced to flee. Rookies, hastily trained and thrust into combat, were often eliminated in their first engagements. Memoirs and mission reports from surviving German pilots recount a pervasive sense of dread. Encounters with P-51 Mustangs were no longer seen as routine engagements but as life-or-death gambles against a machine and pilot combination that consistently outmatched them. The repeated exposure to concentrated Mustang fire eroded confidence, shattered formations, and left many Luftwaffe units in disarray. For the Allies, the Mustang's success translated into operational freedom. Commanders could plan raids with less fear of catastrophic losses, enabling more aggressive targeting of critical German infrastructure. Railway hubs, fuel depots, and industrial complexes were systematically dismantled, accelerating the collapse of Germany's logistical and war-making capacity. Mustang pilots often transitioned from escort missions to offensive sweeps over enemy territory, exploiting air superiority to attack enemy airfields, destroy aircraft on the ground, and further destabilize German defensive capabilities. Statistics highlight the dramatic shift. By March 1945, Luftwaffe losses had reached staggering numbers. Hundreds of fighters destroyed, thousands of flight hours lost, and a disproportionate number of veteran pilots eliminated. Allied bombing sorties, protected by Mustangs, experienced losses as low as 5 to 10% compared to previous missions without escort. The disparity in air power not only safeguarded human lives but decisively influenced the outcome of strategic operations across Western Europe. The Mustang also influenced the psychological landscape of the final months of the war. German pilots and commanders increasingly recognized that conventional air tactics were ineffective against the P-51. The aircraft's reach, speed, and firepower forced evasive operations and fragmented attacks. Morale deteriorated not just among individual pilots but across entire squadrons. Reports from German air units describe a profound reluctance to engage, a significant shift from the confidence that had defined Luftwaffe operations earlier in the war. The Mustang had imposed fear, respect, and a sense of inevitability, psychological dominance that matched its physical lethality. In parallel, Allied pilots internalized the Mustang's advantages, gaining confidence in both their aircraft and their collective tactics. Veteran Mustang pilots recount the precision of dive-and-climb maneuvers, the satisfaction of protecting bomber formations, and the chilling efficiency of the aircraft's 16.50 caliber machine guns. This combination of skill and technology reinforced the notion that air superiority could be achieved and maintained, shaping the way the Allies approached both aerial and combined arms operations in the final phase of the European conflict. Ultimately, the aftermath of Mustang operations over Germany was measured in both tangible and intangible terms. Aircraft destroyed, missions completed, strategic targets neutralized, and morale reshaped. The Luftwaffe's capacity to defend its homeland was irreversibly diminished, while the Allies leveraged air superiority to accelerate the advance of ground forces, facilitate liberation campaigns, and set the stage for the final collapse of the Third Reich. The P-51 Mustang, once underestimated and mocked, had proven itself as one of the most decisive instruments of air power in history. The story of the P-51 Mustang over Europe is a testament to the intersection of human skill, technological innovation, and strategic foresight. What began as a sleek, underestimated aircraft evolved into an instrument that reshaped the air war and, in turn, the trajectory of World War II. German pilots who once laughed at its arrival came to recognize the stark reality. Underestimating the Mustang was fatal. Its speed, range, and 16.50 caliber guns created a lethal synergy, while the discipline and courage of the pilots who flew it ensured that raw power translated into dominance. Beyond statistics and destroyed aircraft, the Mustang's legacy lies in its demonstration of how innovation can alter human conflict. Bomber formations, previously vulnerable to attrition, could now penetrate deep into enemy territory with confidence. Pilots were emboldened, morale strengthened, and tactics refined. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, faced not just the physical loss of aircraft and men, but the erosion of confidence and the fragmentation of strategy, a psychological defeat mirrored in the smoke-streaked skies over Germany. The P-51 Mustang also represents a broader reflection on warfare itself. Technology alone does not guarantee victory. It is the combination of design, discipline, and human adaptability that defines effectiveness. In the skies over Europe, these elements converged to produce a force that was as precise as it was unstoppable. It serves as a reminder that in warfare, underestimation can be fatal, and innovation, when paired with skill, becomes decisive. As the war drew to a close, the Mustang remained a symbol of Allied ingenuity and resilience. It shaped not only the outcome of air campaigns but also the evolution of aerial combat doctrine for decades to come. Above all, it stands as a stark testament to the cost of hubris, the power of adaptation, and the courage of those who faced the deadly calculus of the skies and survived to tell the story.